we have more information for you. So we're going to go over a document that Mari was able to uncover that was released by the governor's office. However, there just wasn't any announcement about it, which is kind of why it took a little bit to uncover it. But it's incredibly relevant and has quite a lot of implications. And so I just want to preface it that we're going to go through it, go through all of the various sections that are important, go through what it means for vendors in the industry. And then as if you guys have questions, we can talk through any questions as well. Just kind of hang in there. It's great in that it offers an incredible amount of clarification. It is insightful in that it puts a lot of obligation on vendors and a lot of liability. So also, after we go through it, we can do questions here. And then if you guys have, questions about people actually implementing, since I'm no longer a planner, and both Amy and Mari, I know, would be very happy to talk with you guys about how they're doing it, how they're handling it with their clients, especially clients who may be a little bit reluctant or a little bit more difficult to work with in that kind of arena. I know that they'll be open to talking with you as well. So, okay, the new document that is going to be posted to the Minnesota Events Coalition site so that you all have it as well is called the Guidance for Providing Food and Beverages On-Site Consumption at Indoor and Outdoor Gatherings. It is part of Stay Safe Minnesota Phase 3. And it was, it says that it was published on the 12th. However, again, we did not find that on the 12th. So I see Mari has linked it here in the chat box for you guys. Or maybe, let's see. Yep, there we go. For you guys so that you can follow along as we go through this as well. Okay, so the new guidelines require, as we expected, the development and implementation of a COVID-19 business preparedness plan. They outline the events that this document applies to and that these regulations apply to, and specifically outline wedding and funeral receptions, parties, and social events after a service. So we know that their intention is for this to be used for wedding receptions and other events. Then it goes on to say, it gives you an example of a preparedness plan, which is great. I should note that we've been working, and my associate Brooke has prepared, and it's going to be sent to a small group from the Events Coalition to put together kind of a preparedness plan that is specific for the events industry, and that will be available on the Minnesota Events Coalition website as well as soon as it's finalized. But that is going to be a key role in these regulations, so do make note of that. All right, so then it goes on to say that the plan addresses the following components and is to be used in addition to other applicable requirements and guidelines. That's pretty standard. They're just saying that if there's other stuff out there, you've got to include that too. And then here's kind of one of the first flags in this document is that the responsible party can either be a venue or a caterer. So this is putting direct liability on both venues and caterers regarding the development, implementation, and execution of the COVID preparedness plan. Okay, so that's one thing. And we'll get into this a little bit more later, but I just want to kind of go through these at the moment. It then goes on to say that responsible party, so venue or caterer, must ensure the plan is evaluated, monitored, executed, and updated under the supervision of a designated plan administrator. The plan must be posted at the event in readily accessible locations that will allow for the plan to be readily reviewed by all participants, volunteers, and workers as required. So what this is saying is that now when you finally get that preparedness plan in place, It needs to be posted throughout the space so that anybody at the event can readily read it to ensure that there is compliance, but then also that the responsible party, so either a person from the venue or a caterer, a person from the catering company, will be responsible for not only evaluating it and putting it together, but also executing it and making sure that it is complied with throughout the night. Okay. This is going to come into play for your documents because that's just a lot of liability for the venue and caterer to incur on them. Okay. So then it goes on to say for key requirements. And there's only some here, it gets into more later, but some of the key requirements are ensuring the 6 feet distance between participants who are not in the same family unit. It later defines family unit as those living within one home together. Limiting your indoor and your outdoor occupant capacity to no more than 25% and up to 250 people, so long as social distancing is required or is adhered to. So that is, that's not new there. It does now state that if there is seating, which it later requires seating throughout pretty much the entire event, that there's a limit of 4 people to a table, unless it is a family unit, so people living in the same household, then you can have up to 6 per table. So this is going to have a significant impact on the number of tables that you have at the event, the floor plan, your rentals, everything like that. So do keep that in mind. This is the same as the restaurant regulations, so it's probably not going to change at all. But that is one to make note of, as that does affect the way that you're going to do layout as well as your rental costs. Then it goes on to require workers. So this is workers not just related to the catering company, but all workers to wear masks at all times. And then also strongly encourage your attendees to wear masks when they're not eating or drinking. For food and beverage, it must be served within the applicable rules and regulations. And it does say that you are able to have self-service food and beverage areas, so long as there is social distancing ensured, and that the plan includes oversight of that social distancing. So having somebody stationed there to ensure that social distancing is happening at these self-service places, and that hands are being sanitized, and then strongly encouraging participants and guests to wear face masks while they're in the service area. They're still citing best practice as having prepackaged foods. Okay, then it goes on for a little bit more. This is where the event planner liability comes in. So now it has, we have our indoor seating up to 25% with maximum of 250, so long as social distancing is maintained, and the family units can be less than 6 feet apart, so long as they live in the same home. All right, now you have to have they call them customers, but all guests must be seated, including at bars. So this is for the ceremony, the reception, cocktail hour, pretty much most of the event. People need to be able to be seated. So you're going to want to get creative here with some cool kind of vignettes and seating options. Then you are going to, let me just see here. I want to make sure I'm not, okay. Then you need to post signage at the venue entrance. And so this would be anything that constitutes an entrance, outlining all of your established protocols. So on the entrance and exits now, you're going to have, first of all, your venue patron disclaimer, but then you're also going to have your COVID preparedness plan that is also going to be posted throughout the venue as well. Now we've got event planner. So this is whoever is the event planner must limit the number of participants, customers, and clients as necessary to allow for the required social distancing and not exceed allowed percentage of occupancy where required. They must provide a controlled flow of the participants as much as possible, including upon start and end of the event. They must manage that the number of participants or customers at any one time is limited to the number for whom physical distancing of 6 feet can be maintained. They must enforce the seating requirements. They must ensure that the band or other entertainment is that they are allowed, but that they also have to maintain social distancing even during the performance, and that activities that generally involve close contact between persons, such as dancing, should be modified to safely increase the physical distance between persons from different households. So again, if you're in the same household, you guys can dance close together, but if you're not in the same household, then you need to be dancing 6 feet apart. And the execution of all of this and the enforcement of all of this is on the wedding planner, or the venue administrator or somebody assigned from catering. Okay, so we've got added liability to all three of those businesses now. There's more. Okay, so they go on to talk about protocols to lower the risk of exposure. And it's, of course, encouraging people who are high risk to consider not attending. However, this is a bit of a kicker. Okay, so you have to have participants, customers, clients. So your clients and attendees, guests, respond to a screening survey upon arrival and check-in, and verify that they have read the screening survey and can respond no to all questions. So this is a survey that will be administered to every single person at the event. Okay, so we've got we have in this, sorry, I was reading a comment there that we'll get to. So advising participants and customers and clients of the added COVID-19 precautions that will be taken prior to arrival at the site. Using websites, social media, pre-appointment phone calls, and confirmations and other outlets to educate the participants, customers, and clients on the steps being taken for their protection and the protection of workers. So fully disclosing before they get there, whether it's on your website, and the clients are directing them to your website, or whether or not you have the guest list and you are reaching out to people, you need to be advising people about the COVID protections before they get to the event. You could do an email or text, a screening survey on the day of the event, or reservation and or post-screening questions at the entrance. Okay, so you're going to need to have somebody there at the entrance doing this screening. Having participants, customers, clients respond to the screening survey upon arrival and check-in, and verify that they have read the screening survey and can respond no to all the questions. And then decline to allow participation in the event if there is any suspicion that they are sick or symptomatic, and advise them to leave the facility. Okay, so this is a lot of extra work on the part of venue and planner, and if there's somebody from the catering company also managing this. So this is probably going to be an extra physical body at the event who is not only counting the number of people with a clicker, but is also doing all of the screening check-in. Face cover is strongly encouraged. We knew that. Event attendees and employees and volunteers should not attend if they or someone in their household is experiencing symptoms of COVID. And that gets into the COVID documents that we've addressed before, but I'll touch on again. And then, well, in uncontrolled venues, making sure that there's no congregating, as well as maintaining social distancing. So again, great that it offered a lot of clarity. The liability is pretty huge here, especially for venues, planners, and caterers. Now it does say in there that you can assign a person to be responsible for this, but I can't really foresee a situation in which one of those three vendors says, I will assume full legal responsibility for all of this. Rather, I would envision that they probably would agree to share it in this situation. And yes, we are going to get to how you can kind of shift things over to your client. But because of the wording of this, and because there is explicit liability here, you will need to take extra extra precautions as a venue, a planner, or a food purveyor. So putting steps into place. So when you're thinking about this from liability perspective, okay, the question becomes, okay, yeah, but how are they going to catch us, right? That is what I keep hearing over and over again. How are they going to catch us? Well, we now know that they are likely to do contact. In fact, they've told us that they will, essentially, that they're going to do contact tracing for anybody who proves positive for COVID. So if you have anybody who is at an event and they, get sick and they go in and they test positive for COVID, that there will be contact tracing, and that will come back to the event. It will come back to the vendors in question. You may be questioned as to compliance. They may look into whether or not all of the stuff was in place. And then there will be alerts made to everybody else who was at the event. You think about, yeah, well, this isn't really going to happen. It's not going to apply to me. I was on Hitched yesterday for the podcast, and we were talking about this. And in fact, Boston, their patient zero was at a corporate event. And now there are all sorts of lawsuits around that event because it was ground zero, patient zero. And so many people, it's something like 200 out of 250 people who were there have now tested positive for COVID. And so now everybody who was involved, all of the vendors, have all been, kind of questioned and under scrutiny. And then you do have the situation in which the actual host themselves is being sued. So all it takes is one person getting sick after attending the event. And then when they're telling the doctors where they were, they mention that they were at this event, and all of a sudden it kind of triggers contact tracing into the event. Now, when you're thinking about, okay, fine, there's contact tracing. They find out that, we had this event, and, how are they going to prove where they got it from? True. That's very, very hard. But now, with these regulations, if any of that stuff was not compliant, it opens the door to liability on you as the venue, the planner, or the caterer, or any other vendor who may have control or say in the situation. And also, just because something is hard to prove doesn't mean somebody can't start a lawsuit over it. So the example that we were using yesterday on the podcast was, okay, you have an event, and afterwards, dad gets sick with COVID and he unfortunately passes away. When they do the contact tracing and they are looking at the event and they're looking at all of this, emotions are so heightened that there's a very good likelihood that they're going to come after somebody who is involved in the event, and easier to go after these three vendors who are already outlined as having potential liability in the execution of the event. Now, you may have indemnification language. You may say, nobody on our team was sick. There's no way that they can bring it back to us. My contract is bulletproof. I mean, as I've said before, no contract is bulletproof. If anybody tells you that, they're lying. So don't believe that. But you may have a really great contract, but the problem is that they can still sue you, or they can still pursue legal action. And then you still have to get out of the lawsuit, which can still cost six figures. And so that's where you want to try to think ahead of what could potentially happen, even if you know that you are in the right. I mean, we just got done defending a lawsuit where we knew that our client was in the right. Our client knew they were in the right. It was three and a half years or something around that of disputes and mediation and litigation just to prove that they were right. And so you really do want to think about this, okay? So think about it, yes, in the eyes of the law, but also, and arguably more importantly, in the eyes of public opinion. You have so many people right now who are their emotions are really heightened that they're just willing to go and just blast people all over social media. And so you want to think about the effect that can have on this as well. So, there are different clauses that I've heard people starting to put in that may not be enforceable. Mostly lawyers know that, like disparagement, it's probably not going to be enforceable. And but most people aren't going to know that. That's probably mostly lawyers would know that. So I do see people putting it in as a deterrent, even though, they know that it may not actually be enforceable. Indemnification is really, really important, as is the case with limitation of liability, force majeure, et cetera. They might be upheld, but you still do want to think about kind of how this actually plays out. And sorry, I keep looking over here because I have notes to make sure we cover everything. And here's the other part of it. Okay. Is, there have been a number of vendors who have been having conversations with their clients, and this is prior to this new news coming out. And so I would imagine this news will probably shift things, but having conversations with their clients. So there's no paper trail, but essentially saying like, do what you want. No big deal. It's going to be cool. In that instance, that type of conversation could nullify the other protections that you have in your contract, because you're knowingly and willfully either engaging in a violation of the law, or you are knowingly and willfully encouraging the violation of the law, and downplaying the liability of it to your clients. So just know that if that were to happen, they still certainly can say, hey, on this date at this time, I spoke with this person and this is what they told me, and I relied on that. A word, your word can be binding if somebody relies on it. And if you're making a representation on behalf of your vendor, your business, your venue, whatever it is, you can be held to that. And so you want to be really careful about what you're saying. And if you do happen to say something that might suggest that somebody can, dance with no restrictions, for example, and they respond back to you in an email and say, okay, for the dance, we're good to go. I would respond back in an email and say, we are good to go within the regulations of Minnesota law as it stands right now. And this is what they are. You also are kind of running a little bit of a risk here in the scenario of your insurance. And I know we've talked about this briefly before, but we have new participants here today. So I just want to touch on this again. If you are knowingly or willfully, or in some other instances as well, I don't want to get too technical here, but if you are engaging in what you know to be a violation of the law, there's a really good chance that your insurance is not going to cover a claim against you. And they may even drop you if this is something that you kind of are repeatedly doing. And so once you have your insurance affected by something like this, it's not necessarily that easy to fix that. And your business insurance is everything. So if you think about, yes, I want to have these, 3 weddings this year that, kind of are left in June and July, or July and August, and they're big weddings and nobody's really going to see anything. Do think about the weight of that. If one of those, 250, 300 person, or 300 people, one of the 250 to 300 people gets sick and there's contact tracing and it comes back and there are violations, your business could be put on hold. It could be blasted all over the media for, not being in compliance with the regulations, even if it was your client's wish. And, you could be facing issues with your business insurance. So these new regulations, kind of explicitly calling out these 3 different vendors for having liability, it really is, it's big. It is a big thing. So more than ever, you want to make sure that you are fully protected. There should not be one vendor in the state of Minnesota that does not talk with their lawyer, or if they don't have a lawyer, contact a lawyer about fixing their contracts before signing any new documents. these new plans are in place indefinitely. I think that we all know that with the opening, there's a really good chance that there's going to be a spike again in COVID. I was just looking at some statistics and grids that Amy had sent me. I was also talking this morning on the phone with somebody who is in the industry, and they were talking about some new medical kind of statistics that came out suggesting a pretty rough fall. So this is going to come back. And so you want to make sure that you are really, really prepared for this. There are your internal documents. Okay. So you've got, your waivers, your disclaimers, all of the new handbook clauses that need to go into place. If you have questions specifically on those, we are doing an employment related webinar tomorrow and the next few weeks. So I can send information on that. I can put it here in the chat box. But if you have a nonprofit, then you want to make sure about the waivers and the disclaimers there for your volunteers. We were just working on some documents related to some of the marches that are going on, and that is a very, very real issue. And then you've got your external documents as well. So for your clients, your guests, now you've got, this survey that they also have to, check when they're coming in. You've also, got all of the internal processes that need to be put in place, such as your checklists. You've got, the client disclaimers, the client notification documents, as well as, your adjusted addendum, your new contracts, and the other documents that would apply to that. We are working on that. As I mentioned, we are working on that preparedness plan that will be posted free of charge through the Minnesota Events Coalition. It's an outline of one. Brooke has kind of analyzed everything that is in all of the different orders to include in that plan. But of course, it's just an outline that you're going to want to tailor to your business and talk through with your attorney. But now that is required to be at every single event and there's compliance required with it, you're going to want to not only use that as, the posting requirements suggest through the order, but you're also going to want to have that as an internal checklist that you use throughout the event as you're preparing for the event. And you're going to want to have that checklist done every single time that you have an event or you do a run through, and you want people to initial next to it, and you want people to date it, and you want to timestamp it, and you want to keep all of those in a folder. Same with some of those worker documents, that relate to, their waiver, their disclaimers, their liability, temperature, things like that. I should note, just in case, you don't happen to be someone who has, an employment protection package through us or isn't on the webinar tomorrow, I do want to mention that anything that is worker related that has to do with COVID and has to do with their medical status does need to be kept in a separate personnel folder. And it should be marked confidential, and it should only be disclosed to those who absolutely need to see it. So in most of our instances, it would be the owner of the business and anybody who is actually doing the medical testing. So you want to make sure that you have those things separated out as well, because if there is ever any issue with a worker, you really want to avoid getting into an issue with violating those employment laws. So much information here. As mentioned, whoever you are, whoever you work with, or if you don't work with somebody and you want to contact, us or another attorney here, do it. Update your documents. This is big. With that said, be patient. Be patient with your lawyers. The standard turnaround time for lawyers of a few weeks should be significantly longer right now, but it's actually shorter. The expectation is shorter, but the work is 3 to 4 times as much. And so it's just be patient. When you talk with them, you want to look at the risks. You want to evaluate your risks and your liability. Okay. So negative PR is a pretty significant risk. A lot of the money at play wouldn't actually lend to true court disputes, just because when working with most litigators, you're going to spend more than, than maybe at question. And so, that's not necessarily the most prudent option, but they will blast you on social media. And then you're dealing with, if you want to have to go after like some type of defamation claim or something like that, mediation is definitely an option. I know our group does e-mediation now. And so that's all done remotely and can be done quite quickly. The risks there are for lawsuits. The risk there is for jeopardizing your insurance and having to deal with that. The risks, of course, are the criminal risks that the government has outlined of being, charged with a misdemeanor or a gross misdemeanor, depending on what type of violation is at play here. And then, if you're talking with people over the phone, you really, really do want to be consistent, because if you are, kind of teetering on that line of, could they be perceiving this as dealing with or as suggesting or encouraging a violation, that puts you in even more liability. So I'm going to, let's see here. I see questions here. I'm going to answer some of these questions. And then we can keep going from there. Okay. So if we have clients who are still wanting to move forward with their wedding with these regulations, is there a way we can get out of liability? Meaning, can we say that we are not able to control the number of people coming into the reception site and do the screening survey? Not really, unfortunately. So this puts it explicitly on the planner to do that. Now you can have the client sign a document saying that they acknowledge all of these regulations and that they are going to have somebody doing all of that. But you would want to have, because of the liability that this language puts on a planner and a venue and a caterer, you would want to have the documentation in place that says, all of that plus indemnification. It also tells you who that person is, who is the person monitoring it, what their contact information is. You'd want to have a meeting with them. And then you're still going to want to have some type of plan in place if that falls through. Because even though you are shifting liability to a degree, you still do have more liability with this document. And, I will say also, it is important now, especially with this language, that you are including some of those new COVID clauses that we've talked about that have to do with, clients assuming kind of the risk in your legal fees here. Because here's another situation. Okay. So you say, client, you're going to do this. Client says, fine, I'll do it. No big deal. Client doesn't do it. All right. They don't have somebody show up, even though they've given you a name, or the person who shows up isn't really doing anything. And then you're like, well, not my problem. It's supposed to be on them. You still can end up in a lawsuit, which can still temporarily shut down your business while you're trying to argue that they were the ones that assumed responsibility. And so that can affect the rest of your business. So yes, you can have this responsibility assumed in part by a representative assigned by the client, so long as you have the full information on that person and you have a plan for enforcement if that person is not going to be enforcing. Can we keep a Google Doc of employee waivers and checklists, or do you recommend hard copies? You can have a Google Doc of that. Yeah, if they, you'd want them signed, of course, before, every event, those different documents have to be signed. But you could keep them, scanned in or something like that. You don't need to have hard copies, but you do want to keep all of the documents that pertain to COVID, the signed copies of all of them for up to 6 years, because in Minnesota, breach of contract statute of limitations is 6 years. There's some instances in tort where you're dealing with, 2-year statute of limitations, but 6 years is going to be what you want to do in this scenario. Is there a hierarchy of liability, venue before planner? Not really. So the way that this is outlined is it kind of says that the venue and or caterer are responsible for the the development and execution and implementation of the COVID preparedness plan, but then it also goes on to outline specific things that the planner is responsible for, and those things are all supposed to be included in the preparedness plan. And so it's kind of a shared liability there. And I would imagine that in the case of, you know, an unfortunate situation in which somebody does go after you, they're going to go after, you know, all three people equally. And then it will become a situation in like you're duking it out to see who was responsible for what. And that's why keeping a really good paper trail of absolutely who is doing everything. And honestly, like if you're more in the mindset of rather than like put this all on one person, let's share in this equally, because it's also going to show that we've had three sets of eyes on this and we feel good about it, which kind of helps establish an industry expectation and standard there. I would consider having somebody somebody from each business sign the document saying, you know, internally saying, hey, we've all checked off on this. We're going to keep this for our records just in case anything ever comes up. You don't need to give that to the client, but you would want to keep that internally. And I did add to our packages, and if you've already bought a package, I'm just going to send it to you. I'm adding documents as I go, and there's, you know, I'm definitely not changing the rates or anything like that. But one thing is that for those people in particular, the venue, the venue, the planner, and the caterer, you know, I would really strongly encourage having a document in place, because you do bear more explicit liability than the other vendors involved. Having a document in place that they are signing saying that, you know, they are the other vendors who you are working with are complying with the regulations, that they are following them, and that if they aren't, that they are assuming full responsibility. And I would even have that signed like vendor to planner, venue to planner, venue to caterer, venue to florist. I would just have it signed for everything, just to kind of show that you've taken reasonable precaution, because this puts so much obligation on those three parties. Are the screening questions considered required? The language of strongly encouraged everywhere else makes it hard to know versus required versus recommended. Yeah, so based on this, it would appear that having that screening is required. So I don't know if it's like an extra, you know, an extra set of hands from the planning company or the venue company that literally stands at the front with an iPad, or I guess people don't really want to touch germs, so I don't really know. But you could do an iPad with hand sanitizer, and they're checking as everybody comes in, they're doing the screening, because you want to make sure. And you could have your clients send the screening out ahead of time, and then you're just going to check it off like, okay, you've completed it, go ahead and go in. But that is something that is required at this point. What if a venue says directly to clients that they will not be checking on households for tables and won't be putting anything in place regarding COVID guidelines and procedures? That is unbelievably risky, because it is in blatant violation of the law. So in that instance, I would have, if you are another venue working with if you are another vendor working with a venue and the venue is doing this, and you happen to be somebody who shares this liability, I would have that venue sign a document saying that they are assuming full responsibility, because they are explicitly telling clients that they do not need to comply with the current regulations, which, you know, unfortunately does put all of these other vendors' businesses at risk. Okay, you mentioned seating is regarding for the entire event. Does this apply to events that do not have food and beverage, like a wedding ceremony, no reception? I'm going to see if Amy wants to send me a message on that one, based on what we have seen so far. And she's specifically spoken with them about seating, but based on what we've seen so far, there does need to be seating. It's suggested that there does. Now, I can't imagine a situation in which if you had people standing truly 6 feet apart, or like huddled together with their little family and 6 feet from other people, that if they're choosing to stand, I don't really know that that would pose a significant issue, because it's not, here's what I think the seating has to do with, is that it's preventing the mingling that usually happens at weddings. And so during an actual ceremony, you're not going to have mingling. Okay, Amy says ceremony guidelines listed under houses of worship guidelines and state the protocols. So you can look under those, the house of worship guidelines, and the protocols there. But I would imagine for like an outdoor type of space, that is ultimately what the goal is to prevent mingling as much as humanly possible. So if you've got like X's on the ground, I've seen them doing it in Europe. It actually looks kind of cool. But if you've got X's on the ground and people are standing and they're not mingling with each other and they are socially distanced, that probably is something that would be acceptable. Reception seating. And yeah, the reception does have to have the seating. Okay, so they have to have at a 72-inch round, 4 people max if they do not live in a home together. If they do live in a home together, 6 people max. And that would not be, and that would also be a scenario, you know, where you can't have like two, 3 person family units sitting at a table together. It's like just your family unit. Okay. All right. What does liability look like if we're providing a service to a backyard wedding with no caterer and no planner, so none of these vendors are present? Whomever it is who is providing the service and helping actually execute the wedding is probably going to be the person who is accepting liability here. So even if there aren't those people present, it's going to be whatever vendors are there who are helping execute the actual event. So an indoor cocktail hour between a ceremony and reception would just need to have seating available for all guests. Can cocktail tables count for this? All guests need to be seated. So not it has to have seating for all guests. All guests need to be seated, and they need to make sure that they are in that socially distanced setting. Okay, florist here. Oh yeah, okay. So yep, so florist, you know, in that instance of the backyard wedding, you know, you are kind of, you know, helping to set up. Now, if you're just setting up and leaving, your liability is pretty limited there, and you're just going to want to have your clients be signing those, you know, the client waivers and the disclaimers there, and the indemnification. But if you aren't there, you're just kind of, you go there, you drop off, you set up, whatever, you're gone. If you're not physically there, you're not going to have, you know, that same liability that, you know, a venue, a planner, or a caterer would have. Now, those 3 might say, okay, if I'm a caterer, then I'm just going to drop off and leave. Well, that doesn't necessarily work either, because you do have obligation to ensure that your product is being served in regulation with the various guidance outlined by the governor's office. And so while that may work for florists, it may work for, I don't know, you know, a rental company. It's not going to be the same for those who have to be on site. What date do you expect the Minnesota Events Coalition preparedness plan to be available? Like I said, it has been drafted. I just need to go through it kind of with a fine tooth-picked comb. Oh man, I'm losing my language here, guys. And then also, you know, kind of run it by the other small board on the coalition. But I would expect, let's see, it's Tuesday today. I would think that it could be up for Friday for sure. All right. If our contract outlines is the coordinator, would the client be considered the planner of their event? No, I would think in this instance, coordinator and planner would probably be interchangeable in this scenario. Let's see here. So let's see. Okay. Yep. There's they've included here some language for the link to the Minnesota Events Coalition mailing list so you can get on that. Okay, so for buffet and stations, either dinner or dessert, do the items need to be prepackaged? What about the interactive stations? How do we control the line to maintain social distancing? So from what we are seeing, they don't need to be prepackaged. They say prepackaged is like still best practice, but they don't actually need to be. In this scenario, they're suggesting that there should be a physical body there, a representative of the venue planner or caterer, who is helping to maintain social distancing. I would imagine you could get kind of cool and creative here with some decals, you know, that you're putting on the floor that kind of keep people apart, and some, you know, cute signage that you're putting on the tables that say, hey, like, you know, whatever, like suites will be here, you know, maintain your 6 feet, whatever. And so you do want to just take that reasonable effort. You know, anything in the eyes of the law is looking at whether or not you've taken reasonable precaution, and that you've not knowingly and willfully encouraged any violation or participated in violation. And so in this instance, if you are actually, yes, I love it, Amy, be sweet, stay 6 feet. That type of scenario, you would have somebody kind of monitoring. And I would imagine, when I was talking with Amy about this yesterday, and I was kind of reflecting on like my bar exam, or like, you know, if you think about a high school dance, if you know that people are there watching you and they have the authority to tell you to stop doing something, you are so much less likely to do it. Okay, so like for the bar exam, every time you get up and go to the bathroom, somebody is watching you. They don't go to the bathroom with you, but they are watching you to make sure that nothing happens. Okay, I literally did not get up once for 2 days in a row, 8-hour days, because I'm just like, oh, the pressure of somebody like going to watch me go to the bathroom. I don't want to deal with that. Okay, same as like a high school dance, right? You're less likely to, I don't know, like spike the punch if there is a chaperone standing right there. And so just having that extra set of eyes can be effective enough. The interactive stations, you know, you just want to kind of do that 6 feet type of thing. So have your interactive station set up, you know, stand 6 feet, you know, back or 3 feet back so that they have enough space to interact with the station themselves. And then you're going to want to be sanitizing in between each interactive option. I think in these scenarios, you know, it would make more sense for interactive to do something like individual, like they could take it with them and have that interaction at their table by themselves. But that, you know, that also may be costly. So it just kind of depends on what you're willing to do with your specific business model. Are guests able to get up and go to the bar to get drinks, or will cocktail service need to replace that? At this point, I would imagine that they're able to get up and go to the bar and get drinks. I didn't see anything that pertained to that directly, so long as they are maintaining, you know, the 6 feet distance. So, you know, one thing that's really consistent with all of these questions, it's kind of the elephant in the room that we haven't addressed yet, is the significant amount of work and expense that this puts on wedding vendors as well, right? So now you've got to like double your tables at a 72-inch, you know, where you maybe would have had, the ability to, you know, seat 8 to 10. Now you're seating 4, maybe 6. Okay. So you're doubling all of your tables, you're doubling your rentals, you know, you're looking at all of these different sanitation things that have to take place. You're looking at extra bodies who are physically on site to help monitor what is going on. And, you know, there is a scenario in which, you know, you can talk with your guests or your clients about, you know, these are the added expenses that we are going to have to incur in order to do this, you know, and have you want to be careful how you're doing this, and you want to be gentle with how you're doing this, but, you know, have that conversation with them about how that's going to get covered, you know, because there are some situations in which, you know, let's say that now you have to hire 2 extra people to physically be there that day. I mean, that could literally half your profit. And that's huge. And so I think that you want to kind of think through that. And that's where you will have clients who are saying, no, I'm going to hire somebody. It'll be fine. They're going to take care of it. But because you still have some of that shared liability from this order, Even with limitation of liability language, even with indemnification language, there is still some potential for liability there, or at least there's still some potential for getting tied up in a lawsuit that you have to get yourself out of because you're wrongly being sued or accused of something. And that's an expense. So while courts may not be inclined to uphold rescheduling fees, they may be more inclined to uphold a list of fixed expenses that were not contemplated at the time of entering into the contract. So let's say that let's say that you have someone now at the door and they're doing the clicker for guest count, and they're also having everybody sign the little survey thing. Okay. Then you've also got somebody who is stationed at the food, at any food station. So it could be one person, it could be multiple people. You've got that person too. Now, you've also got, let's say you hire a company. I think of Two Betties all the time because they're just top of my mind. Let's say that you hire somebody from Two Betties to be the person who is on site, who is going through and sanitizing every hour on the hour throughout the event. Those are all fixed expenses, and those you could show to your client and say, these are additional expenses we have to incur in order to maintain government guidelines. If you would like to continue, having your event during this time, we do need to comply with these. So let's talk about how this is going to be achieved. I would imagine that most clients are going to want their event to go forward, and so that they would find some of those additional costs reasonable in nature. Okay. Let's see. Well, we have to take all of these steps for a group of 10. The way that they have defined it is that it has to do with a wedding reception. So now there's a good chance that yes, you will. They have now taken wedding receptions and parties and such out of the social gathering realm that they were previously in and distinguished them. And so you're probably going to want to have these steps with every wedding reception or party that you have until we are further notified that some of these restrictions have been lifted. The upside is that it will be a lot easier to get 10 people to sign a survey than 150 people. So yes, at this point. With no vendors, but some self-service food and beverage. Yeah. So same type of thing there is you are going to want to have, you're always going to want your COVID preparedness plan posted. I would suggest partnering with some of the local stationers and get once it's finalized, get a really nice quality, on a good card stock that you can hang over and over and over again. But yeah, as a venue planner or caterer, yeah, you're going to want to ensure that these are followed for any size wedding reception or wedding reception or party. Any liability changes for photographers at events related to these changes? Not as it pertains to the monitoring and execution of the event. Compliance with the COVID policies, yes. And, probably vendors that are the venue, caterer, and venue may be asking photographers, florists, other people to sign documents saying that they are in compliance and that they have their own COVID preparedness plan and that they've reviewed the venue's COVID preparedness plan and that everybody is kind of acting in agreement and everybody is abiding by the rules. So that probably will be a shift that videographers and photographers will see. There could be a scenario in which there is a small private event and there aren't a lot of vendors there, and it is, let's say, just the photographer on site. A lot of times the photographer does run the day in those type of situations. They do run the timeline. They help with the timeline. And in that instance, they could be seen as having to assume some of the responsibility of a planner. If the outdoor property of a theater considered a theater or a reception venue, this is probably going to depend in part on how it's licensed, and then in part in how it's used. But I don't think that the theater restrictions at this time are different than the entertainment venues. I think they're all lumped in under entertainment venue, like bowling alley, movie theater. All of that is all kind of the same as the reception venue. The distinguishing factor right now are those that are licensed as restaurants have a higher capacity level, but all of these protocols would still need to be followed for any type of wedding reception, as it's not distinguishing the actual type of venue that is housing this. Are these regulations in place for corporate situations as well? Catered service in a corporate office for employees. So this is in place for, it defines it as being in place for anything where there's food and beverage or not food and beverage, but a reception, but it says food and beverage in the title, but it does go beyond that. On-site consumption in indoor and outdoor gatherings. So wedding, funeral, receptions, parties, and social events. So I would imagine that this would apply in part, but to the person asking me this, shoot me a message. I think that if you are simply popping up at an office for the convenience of employees, there are some parts of this that are going to be relevant, but I think it will be a slightly different situation because it won't be encouraging a social gathered type of setting. Would a food truck be considered a caterer here? Seems obvious, but they usually just drive up to a wedding and not get out of their truck. I think, they would probably be, they probably would be considered a caterer here, but food trucks are already kind of doing the best practice as far as like, there's definitely social distance when you're ordering from a food truck. And it is kind of one-off, and you could do like I know the trolley here in Excelsior has like cones every 6 feet. You could do like the cool decals every 6 feet or something. And you could just put some signage up by the food truck or put a body there, kind of just encouraging the social distancing in that situation. Would these standards apply to a private party at a home with no planners, caterer, etc.? If it is a private party at a home and it is not related to a wedding, then you are going to be bound by the social gathering restrictions, which do limit it to 10 people indoors and 20 people outdoors with social distancing required. So that is going to be how you're distinguishing if it is a private party at a home versus a life celebration event. Yeah, the way that they've outlined it is that it applies to those wedding receptions and other wedding related events. So I would imagine like a rehearsal, because when I asked them for clarification here, I outlined like rehearsal dinner, rehearsal itself, brunch after the wedding. So this is saying that it is for wedding and funeral receptions, parties, and social events after a service. So if it's like a dinner, then it would probably fall under social gathering. If it is a party for some type of life event, then I would think it would fall under these standards. Some home weddings are allowed now. So home weddings are allowed now with these guidelines, because before it seemed like they were only allowed at businesses. Based on the language being used here, if there is any venue that is being used for a wedding and funeral reception, a party, or a social event after a service, so long as everything can be complied with, it would appear that they can be. I know that there have been people doing them. I certainly have heard all of that. So I would think that in this instance, yes, if it's being used for those purposes. Okay, what about delivery only events if caterer is only dropping off food but staffing the event? If caterer is dropping off the food but staffing the event, the caterer is still going to have liability in that situation, especially with monitoring the food and the various food regulations that are in place through Walz's office. Should we be collecting name and contact information with the visitor survey? That is tough. It doesn't, let's see here. I don't believe that it's said on here. I'm just taking a quick scroll for you. So you are going to want at least the name, because that's how you're going to ensure that you actually complied with having every participant respond to the screening survey. So here we go. See Minnesota Department of Health Visitor and Employee Health Screening Checklist. The checklist is also available among Somali Spanish. Okay, so here it has a link. Oh, it actually has the survey for you. So it just is saying, it's just giving you a checklist itself. It's not saying that you have to collect their name or their contact information. You probably would want to collect, well, if you can assure, the question here, okay, so here's the question, right, is are you asking people to disclose personally identifiable information as it relates to their health? That's where you get into a little bit of a tricky area. However, you want to be able to show for your own liability purposes, if anything were to ever come of this, that you did actually screen every individual. So if you're using person A, B, C, that doesn't really work. So I would probably collect even just their initials that can be checked against the guest lists that your client has. You don't need to collect their contact information because the client presumably has that. If that is necessary, you can always ask the client for a comprehensive guest list, but you probably, just to show that you actually went through and did this for everybody, want to have some indicating factor, whether it's their initials, whether it's a first initial, last name, something like that. Do workers count in the 25% capacity? Yes. So the 25% capacity is the maximum amount. So there's been a lot of confusion here because they threw out the 25% capacity. They also threw out the number 250 people. So you can have a maximum of 25% capacity as the fire marshal has outlined your capacity. But if that 25% is larger than 250 people, you have to stop at 250 people. I don't actually think that there are any venues that fall under that. I think even large venues like the Depot aren't even at 100 people, to be honest. So it's 25% capacity, so long as social distancing is maintained. So that's where you want to look at, Amy says, yeah, 90 people in Great Hall at the Depot, if that gives you some context of size, 126 in Great Northern. So that should help give you some context of just how many people and what this restriction means. So kind of the way that you're looking at this is you look at your floor plan and you see how many 6 foot by 6 foot boxes can fit in there. And that is how many people could fit in there socially distanced. And then if that number is lower than 25% of your capacity, then you have to go with that lower number. If it is the same or higher than your 25% capacity, then you're stuck at the 25% capacity. So every physical body in that building would count towards that capacity limit. Amy says 384 at the pavilion. And I haven't looked at any of these floor plans, so I haven't looked at kind of how these numbers work. But essentially you're looking at the actual like large open spaces. Oh, these are all at the depot. Excuse me. So, you know, what you're doing is you're looking at these big open spaces and you're putting in these 6 foot by 6 foot boxes. And then that's how you're kind of coming up to your number. It is not automatically 25%. It is not automatically 250. And it isn't, it also isn't like 25% only applies to guests. It's like every physical body on that, on the actual, at the actual event on the premises. Okay. Do you guys have other, oh, here's another question. Okay. What's the overall expectation for dance floor area? Enough space for all guests 6 feet apart? I don't think so. But you do want social distancing, right? So it says here that, and I'm sorry, this earbud keeps falling out. That's why I keep touching it. Anyway, for dancing, you know, you are allowed with your family unit to not have to social distance. But you do need to, it says, safely increase physical distance between persons from different households. So, you know, if you're looking at your guest list and you're seeing how many people are in a household together and you're kind of looking at them in bubbles on the dance floor, and then you want to look at the other remaining people and kind of see roughly what it would look like to do them 6 feet apart, and come up with a rough number there. Okay, here we go. Back to question about residential weddings. I thought restrictions said no more than 25 outdoors, SNDN 10. Not sure what 10 indoors. Are you saying residential weddings are allowed now? Based on the language in this instruction, it outlines controlled and uncontrolled venues. So uncontrolled venues, let's see. So there's uncontrolled and controlled venues. Oh, I should also say it does mention like no carpooling. So that obviously affects things like transportation. I am coming to the residential thing, but I just noticed some more highlighting here. Avoid congregating in common areas like entries, restrooms, or hallways. At this point, this is saying that this applies. Gatherings taking place in indoor and outdoor venues such as event centers, faith-based weddings, community centers, rental halls, similar outdoor spaces that are providing food and beverage on site for consumption must assign responsibility. Examples include, so yeah, so they have not explicitly answered us about the homes in this clarification. We did ask them about that. I don't know if Mari or Amy, if you're on here, if on the call that you specifically talked with them about homes or private estates. You know, I am aware that people are doing these. I'm not going to say go ahead and do it, because based on this, it could kind of be taken both ways, to be honest. but I will look into that and I will follow up with you directly. Commenter who has asked that. I'm making a note right now. Amy says, we did not discuss homes. We spoke about events as a whole. Yeah, so I don't know if Amy or Mari, if you have any thoughts on this. But the way this is written is wedding receptions, parties. So it's a little up in the air, but I will look into it. If I can get a hold of them, I will look into that and I will circle back with you, to the asker, the requester. Amy says takeaway is that it's all the same. It's kind of what I'm leaning towards as well. Is there a specific place that you guys have seen that specifically says no residential, or is that just kind of been interpreted based on what's happened before? And yes, there is, yes, now a ton of liability on, the planner, or if it is at a venue, or if there's a caterer involved, there is a lot of liability now on those vendors. Okay, so 250 in a venue at one time. So like at Depot, you can't use multiple rooms at the same time to exceed 250. Nope, can't do that. Okay, let's see. Thinking about rain plans for indoor and outdoor combo spaces, would a wedding need to stick only to the indoor capacity number to ensure they are able to comply in the event of rain? That's a great question. I think that's kind of a call for the venue. You might have to have that conversation with your client and say, if it rains and you guys have said that you want more people there outside, we are not going to be able to let all of those people inside. For me, it seems like a planning perspective. You wouldn't want to have to tell people, like, sorry, you have to go home now, it rained, and you are the tables that have to go home. It's the same type of thing of like, are you really going to invite more people to the ceremony and then tell them all that they can't come to the reception? So, but ultimately a decision for the client. I think you can have that conversation with them. But from a logistical standpoint, and to kind of take a little heat off of yourself, as a venue or planner or caterer or whomever is helping execute kind of the numbers logistical side of things, I would probably encourage sticking with the number that can be accommodated indoors. Drop off food at a park, would caterer be liable? The kind of the drop off situation at a park where you're not setting up food for it to be delivered, and then it's kind of like a restaurant takeout, right? But you still want to make sure that you're complying with the various food regulations that have been administered and set up through the governor's office. Okay, another person wanting to know about homes. Yeah, at this point, I'm tending to agree with Amy that the takeaway is the same, that if these are at homes, if the home is being used for an actual venue for a wedding reception, I tend to agree with Amy that this is treated in the same way, but we will try to get a hold of the governor's office to clarify that point. If there, I realize that there may be more questions that come up. There certainly will be questions that I think come up as you are starting to implement these. Like I said, do touch base with your lawyer, or if I'm your lawyer, touch base with me. If you don't have a lawyer yet, we're happy to talk with you guys. Okay, home gatherings still listed on the stay safe plan is 10 indoor, 25 outdoor. Sorry, had another call come in. Do we know if that is the same, if like a home gathering, like a dinner party, is any different than a wedding reception? that question back to the person who just informed me of that. I can also, if you have concerns about home gatherings, I'm making a little list here, so let me know and I can send you guys a follow-up email. I think because you had to register for this webinar, I think that I can also see who registered and send it to everybody. If not, we will make sure that we post it. So they believe that the restriction on that, the home gathering, is that it's a non-business setting with limited capabilities for professional safety planning. So we will, how about this? I'm going to, I took a list of the people who have asked that, but then we're gonna look into that further and we will circle back with you on that point. Okay, so like I said, touch base with your lawyer for sure. I'm going to include on here our website that has the different COVID protection packages and the code that you need to access that website. If you have a lawyer, talk with them. And I know that this is like just a truckload of information, and the added liability is pretty tough to process. So think on it, sit with it, and then let us know what questions you have, because we want to make sure that you are protected. And I fully understand and recognize, especially being a former planner, that there are situations in which other vendors may be on a different page than you, and that there also are going to be difficult clients. And so you want to have the best tools to make sure that you can execute this as you move forward and stay protected and ensure that your business can be operational for 2021, which is going to be best year ever for the wedding industry. I'm hopeful. So, okay. Let's see. And yes, absolutely. Minnesota events industry, Minnesota events community, make sure that you can, go to the Events Coalition page and check out for information there. One other question, do you have a checklist of all the things that we need for internal versus external so we can confirm that we're as covered as possible with the different tools? Yeah, so on this link that I'm sending you where it outlines the different packages, it actually lists under there kind of the different items that you should be looking for. So you can use that as a checklist if you want and kind of go through it and see what you do have in place and what you may need to add on there. So, okay. Any other questions right now, guys? Well, it has been a pleasure as always. And I look forward to talking with you guys again soon. And if you are an employer and you have questions related to your employees, your workers, your interns, your contractors, we are doing an employment webinar tomorrow at 2:30 to talk about all of the different internal factors that need to play into things and the disclaimers that you need and all of the new policies and handbook clauses that need to be in place. So you can find information on the website for that too. So sending you guys my best. Have a good day. Bye.